In the year 536 AD, something happened that would forever change the course of human history. Without warning, the sun began to disappear, not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, unsettlingly, day by day, as if the world itself was dimming. Across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, people noticed that daylight no longer felt normal. The sky remained covered in a strange, pale haze. Shadows looked unnatural. Even at midday, the world seemed trapped in twilight. For the next 18 months, the sun barely shone. A mysterious dry fog descended upon the world, a persistent veil that choked the light and cast a perpetual twilight over the land. Day after day, the source of all life and warmth remained a pale, indistinct disk in the sky, its power mysteriously stolen. The cold deepened, seeping into the very bones of the earth. Without the sun's full strength, temperatures plummeted, triggering the most severe and protracted cold episode in the Northern Hemisphere in the last 2,000 years. Historians looking back at the cascade of suffering that followed would later describe this period as the worst year to be alive. Ancient texts from around the world, written by people who could never have known of each other, tell remarkably similar stories of this global catastrophe. In the heart of the Byzantine Empire, the great historian Procopius, an eyewitness in Constantinople, wrote that the sun gave no more light than the moon, shining dimly for an entire year. He described it as a solar eclipse that seemed to last forever. Crops withered in the fields. The grape harvest failed. The seasons lost their meaning, blending into one long, bleak winter. A deep, primal fear spread across the empire as the very order of the cosmos seemed to be unraveling. Half a world away in China, official court records speak of a yellow dust that rained from the sky, so thick it could be scooped up in handfuls. They document snow falling in the middle of summer, a disastrous omen that destroyed the year's planting. Crops failed across entire provinces. Granaries were soon empty. Starvation became widespread, a silent plague consuming the countryside. Desperate families abandoned their ancestral homes, setting out on futile journeys in search of food that did not exist. In the Gaelic monasteries of Ireland, the annals record a failure of bread from the year 536 to 539. Scribes wrote of years of extreme famine, hunger, and mass death that followed the dimming of the sun. Entire communities, their names and stories lost to time, vanished from the historical record, erased by starvation and the diseases that preyed on the weakened. From the Fertile Crescent to the nascent kingdoms of Europe, from the Americas to the steppes of Asia, people looked to the heavens and asked the same terrifying question. Was this a punishment from the gods? The end of days? What had happened to the sun? At first, many believed the apocalypse had arrived. Religious movements surged, panic spread. Some believed the gods were angry. Others feared that the sky itself was collapsing. But the darkness did not lift. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. The climate began to shift dramatically. Temperatures dropped across the northern hemisphere. Summers became cold and wet. Winters became brutal. Crops failed again and again. Food shortages became catastrophic. Trade networks collapsed. Cities began to empty. Civilizations that had thrived for centuries suddenly found themselves on the brink of extinction. For more than 1,000 years, the global catastrophe of 536 AD remained one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. The accounts were there, scattered across continents in the fragile records of a dozen cultures. But they were disconnected, like whispers from a shared nightmare. Chroniclers wrote of divine anger, of dragons battling in the heavens, of ill omens that foretold the fall of kings. They saw the effects, but the cause remained shrouded, a puzzle with its most crucial piece missing. For centuries, historians could only speculate, unable to connect the dots between a darkened sky in Byzantium, a failed harvest in Ireland, and summer snows in China. The event was a ghost in the annals of history, a terrifying episode without a clear origin. The answer, it turned out, was not buried in a dusty archive, but in a library of a different kind, one written by the Earth itself. Far to the north and south, in the vast frozen wastes of Greenland and Antarctica, history is recorded not in ink, but in ice. Each year a new layer of snow falls, compacting the old, trapping within it a perfect chemical snapshot of the atmosphere. Dust from distant deserts, pollen from forgotten forests, and something more telling, the microscopic residue of fire and earth. This frozen chronicle, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, held the key. As investigators of the deep past learned to read this icy scripture, they searched for the layer corresponding to the years of the Great Dimming. When they analyzed the ice dating to 536 AD, they discovered something extraordinary. A dark, unmistakable band, thick with microscopic shards of volcanic glass and sulfates. It was a massive spike in volcanic debris, a chemical signature unlike almost any other in the last 2 millennia. The time capsule had been opened, and its message was terrifyingly clear. This was evidence of one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in recorded human history. The sheer volume of material found in the ice suggested an event of almost unimaginable scale. Further analysis of the ash's chemical fingerprint pointed towards the northern hemisphere, with a likely culprit in Iceland. But the mystery deepened. Some evidence suggested a second, nearly simultaneous eruption, perhaps in Central America. The leading theory now is that the planet was hit by a devastating 1-2 punch. 2 colossal volcanoes, thousands of miles apart, exploding with such cataclysmic force that they altered the climate of the entire world. These were not ordinary eruptions. They were so violent that they blasted millions of tons of ash, rock, and sulfur dioxide not just into the sky, but high into the stratosphere, the upper layer of the atmosphere. Here, above the weather, the fine particles would not be washed out by rain. Instead, they began to spread, carried by the high-altitude jet streams. Within months, this material formed a dense, persistent aerosol veil that encircled the planet. This stratospheric haze acted like a planetary mirror, reflecting a critical portion of incoming sunlight back into space before it could ever reach and warm the surface. The Earth's thermostat had been violently turned down. The result was a volcanic winter, a sudden, unnatural, and catastrophic cooling of the planet. Global temperatures plummeted by as much as 2 degrees Celsius. To put that in perspective, the Little Ice Age, a period of hardship that lasted for centuries, was caused by a drop of just half a degree. Even a 1-degree drop today would be enough to trigger widespread, devastating crop failures. The world of 536 AD experienced a cooling event 4 times as powerful, and it happened almost overnight. For the people living through it, the sun had vanished, the warmth had fled the earth, and the world they knew was beginning to freeze. The earth had entered a climatic nightmare. Sunlight vanished, rain patterns shifted, frost covered once fertile farmland, fields turned to ice. Entire harvests died before reaching maturity, and famine spread across continents. But the suffering did not end there. Weakened by hunger, populations became highly vulnerable to disease. Within a few years, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history swept across the world: the Justinian Plague. Carried by fleas and rats, the disease devastated the Byzantine Empire, killing an estimated 30 to 50 million people, nearly half the population of Europe at the time. Cities turned silent, trade collapsed, empires weakened. The ancient world began to crumble. For many historians, the catastrophe of 536 AD was not merely a disaster, it was the tipping point. They argue it triggered a devastating chain reaction of collapse, a cascade of failures that marked the true, brutal beginning of the Dark Ages. The intricate web of Roman and post-Roman society, already strained, began to unravel completely. Trade routes that had connected empires for centuries withered. Grand cities, once beacons of culture and commerce, saw their populations dwindle as people fled in search of food and safety. It was a period defined not just by chaos and instability, but by the profound and tragic loss of knowledge. Libraries were abandoned, their precious scrolls left to rot. The wisdom of the classical world, in science, philosophy, and art, faded from memory, preserved only by a few isolated monks in remote scriptoria. Generations of learning vanished into the encroaching darkness, a monumental intellectual regression. But perhaps the most unsettling part of this story is the stark revelation of how fragile civilization truly was. The grand monuments, the complex laws, the sprawling empires, all were built on the assumption of a stable world, a predictable climate. The events of 536 shattered that illusion of permanence. One volcanic event, a single geological spasm on the far side of the world. One shift in climate, a veil of dust that choked the sun, and the world they knew, fell apart. We may believe we have surpassed such vulnerability. We light watchfires on the hills, our sentinels scanning the horizon for threats. Our wise men study the stars with intricate astrolabes, charting the heavens for omens. We build ever stronger walls and deeper granaries, convinced of our own resilience. Yet, the scales of fate are as delicately balanced today as they were then. Our own complex world, a global network of trade and technology, remains deeply vulnerable to the whims of the planet. A massive eruption, a solar storm that paints the sky with fire, a rock falling from the heavens. Any one of these ancient fears could manifest again. Any one of these could sever the delicate threads that hold our own civilization together, and once again plunge the world into a new and unforeseen darkness. The year 536 AD serves as a haunting reminder that beneath our technology, beneath our progress, humanity remains at the mercy of the planet. And when the sun fades, history itself can collapse.